Hi, everyone. Welcome back to the show. Today's show, I have Rain Elizabeth Stickney. She is a spiritual counselor and meditation teacher. She lives in Vermont, which is my favorite state, so I'm super jealous about that. But she is originally from the San Francisco Bay Area. And she has a really interesting background. She holds a bachelor's degree in psychology with a special studies in biofeedback and somatics, a master's degree in East West psychology with a certificate in expressive arts consulting and education. And she is trained in hand parenting by connection and the Gottman Method. So she really has a very interesting background that she has used and combined to do what she does now, which is running beautiful meditation series. She has actually a meditation group, a year-long group. She offers free meditations. She has meditations on Insight Timer, which, if you've never gone to Insight Timer, it's a really great resource. It's free. There's all different types of things on there for meditations to teachings and courses. It's fantastic. Rain was also a worker for 2 decades and developed her own approach called emotional integrative body work, which honors the four pillars of the human experience: body, mind, heart, and spirit. And she has a weekly podcast, Every Moment is Sacred, which interweaves healing and meditation into everyday life. So, we kind of touched on a lot of different topics during this podcast. Typically, I feel like my guests, we hone in on one particular topic. But in this particular interview, because Rain's background is so diverse, I wanted to touch on a bunch of different parts of her work and her background. So we talked about meditation, of course, one of my favorite topics. We also talked a little bit about Buddhism, and I think I'll be having an upcoming show that's dedicated toward Buddhism. I've always been curious myself, and I've dipped my toe into the tradition, but I'd love to learn more. So we talked about Buddhism a bit. We talked about those two methods that she is trained in, the Gottman method and the hand in hand method. And we talked about nervous system regulation and how we tend to push through and forget that our nervous system really needs to be regulated. And when we do, we can see the outcome. We have so much more flow in our life, and we have so much more ease, and that we need to learn to integrate that nervous system regulation into our day, and not just think that we just need to sleep at night and that's all we need to do for our nervous system. So take a listen, lots of different interesting topics. Let me know which one stood out for you, which one that you listened to and thought, "Oh man, I wish Katie would do a show on that. I want to learn more about that." So if there's a particular thing we touched on this week that you want to know more about, email me at katie@momontheverge.org. Or of course, you can always find me on social media. And I will look into getting an expert on that topic. And you can find my social media handles in my link tree in the show notes. All right. I also mentioned a podcast that was really good and a few other things. So I will link all this stuff in the show notes. So lots of resources this week in the show notes. Enjoy the show. All right. Hi, Rain. Welcome to Mom on the Verge.
Thank you. Hello, Katie. It's so wonderful to be here.
It's wonderful to have you. I'm excited for this conversation. We were just saying offline before I hit record that you and I are on Instagram together, friends on Instagram, and I see all of your beautiful meditations that you do, and your meditation offerings. So that's like very near and dear to my heart. So we can talk about that. But first, how about you just introduce yourself and just, who you are and where you are in your life, and why you feel passionate about some of the things that we're going to be talking about.
Okay, I'll give it my best shot and just ask any questions that you would like.
Okay.
And the brief overview is that I was born and raised in the San Francisco Bay Area of California. And I lived there in my home state for the most part until 3.5 years ago when I moved to Vermont. And I live in Vermont now. And in a forest, and so it's easy for me to hug trees every day.
Mhm.
I was raised spiritually, so I've always meditated my entire life. I don't
Mm.
remember a moment not meditating, and my parents were meditators, so I've mentioned on another podcast interview recently that there's a lot of interesting research these days about how meditation affects the cells and people's health. And so, if we
Mhm.
just consider not only myself, but many people who are children of meditators, what that is doing for humanity, really.
Mhm.
And I have that in me. So I offer meditation to the world in various ways. And I'm definitely passionate about it.
So that's really interesting. And I am also a meditator, and I have tried so hard to get my kids interested and willing to participate, and they just really don't want any part of it. And I keep hoping that one day, like that, they're seeing me do this day in and day out, and they, know it's all the reasons why that I do it and why it is so good for our mind, body, soul, all of those things. That maybe one day they'll be like, maybe I'll try that thing that mom said was
Mhm.
good. But when you were a child, did you have resistance to doing it, or you wanted to do it? And was it formal? Was it like a formal sit down, like sit cross-legged on the floor, close your eyes, kind of what we typically think of meditation to be?
Yes, and it was also casual. So my parents met at Naropa Institute in the summer of 74. And that was when Naropa was new and it was only a Tibetan Buddhist school, and Chogyam Trungpa was there. And so they met under the premise of being on a spiritual journey each themselves. And they also had other teachers. They weren't strictly Tibetan Buddhist, but that is a strong influence in their life and in my life. And as I was growing up, they had a traditional practice. We always had an altar in our house.
Mhm.
We always had meditation cushions. My mother sewed my meditation cushion as a toddler. I mean, when I was a toddler. So I always had a place to sit if I wanted to. The truth is, I played. I played all around them, and they sat very stoic. And they had malas in hands, and my father did yoga every day. And I found it to be a wonderful jungle gym play area of silence. And so, just naturally, I respected the silent space, but
Mhm.
I would be a kid. I
Right,
loved all
right.
the objects. I would look at all the special things. I would ring the bells, which is not exactly silent, but it was sacred.
Yes. And your parents were meditating through this, you ringing the bells.
Oh,
That's
yes.
fantastic.
I mean, there might be a kind and gentle hand kind of on top of mine and a guidance elsewhere, but my parents, they were and they are very kind people. My mother has passed away, but they've always,
Mhm.
both of them, top notch in kindness for sure.
Yeah, yeah. I
Yeah.
mean, I think that's fantastic, and it's what we talk about on this show a lot, which is that, what we do as parents, and we focus a lot on motherhood, but as parents, really has a ripple down effect to our kids. And so, yeah, that you got to play in that space, that you got to watch them, that they redirect at you kindly. Um, like, what do you think that that did for you in your life when you think back on that experience and you think about your life now? How do you think it shaped you having had that experience?
Well, I have to say that there was also a natural inclination that I had. I have 9 brothers and sisters, and we've all been raised slightly differently, and we all have different inclinations. A unifying factor for all of us is we're tremendously loving, and we all have our own individual sense of spirituality. But
Mhm.
I'm really the only one who took my parents' path and made it my own. So that was the natural inclination that I had. So that's different than my other siblings, and they've taken their spirituality to mean something else for them.
Okay.
Um, at the same time, what my parents offered me gave me a really good example of how to always have a sacred space in home
Mhm.
so that the
Yeah.
sacredness was not found outside of the home. It is, but not only outside of the home, but that the
Right.
home is also part of the sacred. And I embody that in my family. And before I was a mom in my individual life, it's always been important that my home is sacred. And so an altar or various, like right now, I'm holding a stone that
Mm.
symbolizes clarity, and things like that are very helpful for me. So I live a very embodied life as was handed to me by my parents.
Yeah, that's beautiful. And with 9 children, that they still found time every day to meditate and your dad to do yoga. I mean, if they can do that, I think we don't have an excuse. With
Yes.
9 children, finding a way to make that happen every day is like a miracle in itself.
Yes.
Um, and
But
so yeah.
let me just interrupt for a brief moment and
Mhm.
define my terms because my parents have both been married 4 times, and so there's a collection of siblings, and there are
Okay.
10 of us, and I am in the middle, and in one household, we have had up to 8 at the same
Okay.
time, but not everybody all together at once, and there's
Okay.
so I have a huge constellation of parents and step-parents and grandparents and aunts and uncles and all the
Yeah.
rest. Like, it's
Yeah.
a mandala of life around me.
That's so cool. That is so cool. Well, you mentioned Tibetan Buddhism as being a big influence in your life. So, I'm a yoga practitioner and I'm very into yoga philosophy, but Buddhism is, I feel like a close cousin to that philosophy. And it's also something that interests me a lot. So can you speak to that a little bit? Like what are the basic tenets? What are some things in that area that have like stood out for you and like been really impactful in your life?
My experience of Buddhism was first a very beautiful experience because there's a lot of gorgeous artwork and
Mhm.
statues in that tradition. Ritual is very important. The ways that things are done are very important. And when we look at Buddhism as a whole, there are so many different schools and so many different Buddhist ways that each path of Buddhism can be looked at and something else will be found.
Mhm.
Secondly, as I grew up, I went through a lot of hardships as a child, and Buddhism was one teaching that was given to me as a young person, like elementary school age, for example. And the teachings of Buddhism did not match the hardships that I was feeling. And so I became very conflicted about the path of Buddhism
Mhm.
because I wanted the hardships I was feeling to be met by my spirituality. And it's not to say that Buddhism can't, it's just the way that the gifts were handed to me
Mhm.
um, were challenging. And
Right.
so I grew up later in my teenage years really hating Buddhism and making it the bad guy. And then much, much later, when I was in graduate school, and even now, I continue to rebalance my relationship with Buddhism and really understand the beauty of it. And another path of Buddhism that I really like is Zen Buddhism.
Mhm. Mhm.
And I have a dear friend who is in that tradition and raising her family in that tradition. And so we get to talk spiritually and
Mhm.
really hash out the goods and bads of anything as friends do.
Right.
But there's a maturity that has happened over my life. So
Mhm.
the loving kindness practice in Buddhism, for example, is something that I teach. And I don't consider myself to be Buddhist, but it's a very important practice. And especially
Mhm.
when we include ourselves in the kindness and in the love.
Mhm. Yeah. Actually, it's funny that you're saying that because I do a little mini sode each week, and I did a loving kindness meditation this week that I released, and then my podcast episode this week is on ahisma, which is nonviolence, and how loving kindness is part of that nonviolence, and how it can when we practice loving kindness, our capacity for compassion expands, which then, of course, leads to nonviolent behavior. So,
Mhm.
and yes, we have to direct it at ourself first. It's like ground zero is your own, soul, and then moving outward. So,
Mhm.
yes, I love all that, and I do. From what I know of the Zen Buddhism tradition, I really like it. I listen to some podcasts. W- w- Sorry, some podcasts that are the hosts are Zen Buddhists.
Yeah.
And so their philosophy is a lot of it is very similar to yoga philosophy, but obviously there's differences, but there's also like large overlapping areas. And it is, yeah, it seems to be, from what I know of it, a beautiful tradition. Do
Mhm.
you, and I too grew up, so I grew up in the Christian tradition, and also felt like it was just not meeting my needs. Um, and then I was kind of lost because I felt like my needs were not being met there. And I was like kind of expected to fall into that tradition because that's what had been in my family for so many years. But then I tried very hard, but when I just felt like, no, this is just not right for me, I was floundering because I didn't have any
Mm.
other thing to turn to. Because, at least where I live, I'm in the Northeast United States. Christianity is the prevailing religion that is practiced in this area. So it's very hard to find people to guide you in any of these other traditions.
Mhm.
So how, if someone was interested, do you have recommendations on that? If someone's like, well, I'm in Christianity and it's not working for me, and I've always been curious about Buddhism, how would they even begin to start that journey?
Mhm. Mhm. It's a very good question. One of the Buddhist teachers who I really respect and love is Thich Nhat Hanh, who is no
Mhm.
longer living, but a
Yes.
wonderful model of coming from hardship and teaching peace,
Mhm.
which is Buddhism at its best, in my opinion.
Yeah.
And even though he's no longer living, his books and his teachings, and there is a wonderful podcast called The Way Out is In, and the hosts do a great job of describing Thich Nhat Hanh's teachings and their personal experiences with him.
Mhm.
And for kind of an overview, those are some places I would go just to see, does it ring true for the person? Because
Yeah.
spirituality, as both of us are saying, really
Mhm.
works when it meets us in the place that wants to be met.
Yeah.
And if it's not Christianity and if it's not Buddhism, that's okay. There are a
Mhm.
million other practices and ways and disciplines that are available to us. But to
Mhm.
be met is so precious.
Yeah. Yeah, when you start feeling like, and that podcast, by the way, is the one of the podcasts that I mentioned is
Hmm.
that one that I listen. They're fantastic. And
Hmm.
there's two men who host that podcast, and one was like a direct student of Thich Nhat Hanh, and actually I think
Hmm.
cared for him until his death.
Hmm.
So he really knows his teachings really well. And actually that's a fascinating story because I think he left his family and joined them
Hmm.
at Plum Village when he was
Hmm.
14, which is like
Hmm.
mind blowing. I have a daughter who's
Hmm.
15. Like, I can't imagine that. So quite a crazy, life adventure for him. But yeah, put that podcast in the show notes. It's a really great one.
Hmm.
Um, but now I've lost my train of thought.
Oh, fun.
We were talking. I don't know. You know what? This is what happens in your mid 40s, everyone. So, anyone out there who's listening in their mid 40s is like, yeah, I know. Um, So, okay, you mentioned that you went to college and then you were getting a master's. So
Mm.
what are your degrees in?
Okay. Yes, I really love my education. I love continuing my education. I chose to go to a liberal arts school for college, and the liberal arts program was really great for a while, but then I transitioned to psychology, where I could study transpersonal psychology, psychophysiology, and specifically use biofeedback for the practice of stress reduction and relaxation training. And that married something for me that I really needed, which was the nuts and bolts of, does this really work?
Mhm.
And the transpersonal aspect of more of a humanistic and Jungian view of psychology, paying attention to dreams and symbology and relationship. So that was a BA in psychology with a special emphasis in relaxation training. And then I went on and I studied at the California Institute of Integral Studies in San Francisco, specifically for expressive arts therapy. And I was studying to be a licensed marriage family therapist with the use of the arts for expression, which was great, but it did not fulfill my need for spiritual study. And so I bridged that program across to East West psychology, and I got an MA in East West psychology, which joins the Eastern perspective of spirituality and the Western perspective of psychology, and does its best to make sense of that
Mhm.
joining, and with a certificate in expressive arts consulting and education.
Okay. Wow, that is really cool. That it sounds like a fascinating path that you took. And so what are some of the things I personally love? So I have a science background as well. And I know there's so much emerging research on how these practices that are thousands of years old, and we know they work just from experience, just having the experience of them. The science is now proving that they work and showing
Yeah.
why they work,
Mhm.
which is cool. I mean, I don't need that personally because if I experience something and I know it works for me, that's good enough.
Mhm.
That's good enough. I'm receiving benefit. Check. I love it. But I think it's really helpful for a lot of the population who may disregard these things and think they're kind of woo woo and out there and not really something that is valid. I think it
Mhm.
validates them in a certain part of the population who really needs that, you know, that needs that proof.
Mhm.
So what are some of the things that you know of that things like meditation or relaxation or yoga or any of your practices that you studied that have been scientifically proven to help?
Mhm. Yes, it all boils down to the relaxation response,
Okay.
which we all have access to, but oftentimes are not conscious of that access, or we have become so stressed out by the day to day or big things in life that takes our physiology so far from that relaxation response that we can't sleep, we have inflammation, we get sick, all sorts of things they seem natural. And we can say, oh, that's just part of the aging process. However, when we remember how to relax in a physiological way, there is a natural regeneration that occurs in the body, and it is how the body heals. And without it, even the best surgeon is going to have a difficult time healing a person of whatever they're struggling with because the body still needs to heal. The body
Mhm.
still needs to go through its own healing process. So when we take something spiritual like meditation and we use it to relax, we have the support of our bodies to begin to see through our thoughts and to begin to um, have space to feel our emotions. And we can begin to ask spiritual questions that are true to our own selves. Like I can never really know what somebody else's spiritual question is, but there's a beautiful thing that happens when the relaxation is working. And you will notice this because very simple things that we can easily overlook will happen, like our hands will get warm,
Mhm.
our large muscles will relax and will feel heavy, will feel kind of rooted to the earth naturally.
Mhm.
There'll be kind of there'll be a spaciousness in the mind, kind of a larger peripheral vision, like a sense 360 degrees around a person just naturally. And these things open up because, in my opinion, we're built to be aligned. We're
Mhm.
built to be embodied in our bodies. We're built for our minds to be supported by great neurological function that is supported by other things like our gut health and all these things that are very trendy to look at, but they're real. Like, how do we breathe? It actually matters.
Right, right. It
And on
does.
yeah, and on and on. It's the most simple thing that I am the most passionate about. And it's
Yeah,
just, how do we recover after stress? How are we with ourselves? How is our breath? Those
yeah.
kinds of questions are very fruitful in my practice and what I offer to people.
Yeah, and that relaxation piece really is huge. I think it's commonly called now, and correct me if I'm wrong, like vagal something,
Mhm.
vagal relaxation or something like that. And the
The
vagus nerve,
vagal
I know
response.
the
Mhm.
vagal response, right? It's the,
Yeah.
stands for the wandering nerve. It's a huge nerve that innervates like basically, I think, from like the root of our skull throughout our core. And it can be activated or deactivated. And then if it's activated, you're more in fight or flight. And if it's deactivated, you're more in rest and digest or relaxation mode. And it's powerful. I mean, I don't know any other word for it. I am constantly amazed by that. I have a morning practice where I meditate every morning when I wake up. At least I try. Like this morning, my daughter like shook me out of my sleep and she's like, I missed the
Mhm.
bus. You got to get me to school. Blah, okay. And, but I got home and my son was up there on different schedules. And I was like, buddy, I just got to go up and meditate for like 15 minutes and I'll be back down because my brain was so foggy and scattered and this is every day, like just kind of like a messy pile up there. And then I'll just spend 10 or 15 minutes meditating in the morning and it's like the cloud lifts and things become brighter and clearer and more organized. And this is out of sleep, right? We think that our most relaxed period of our day is sleep. But in my experience, it's actually not.
Mhm.
Now, don't get me wrong, I love sleep and sleep
Mhm.
is very important for our health and is, where we heal and all that kind of stuff. But I almost feel more relaxed in my meditations than I do
Mhm.
in my sleep because I come out of meditation instead of feeling that foggy, scattered brain, I come out of meditation feeling very clear and
Mhm.
focused.
Mhm.
So, do you have any thoughts on that?
I do, and I love this point that you're making. I would have to look more deeply into the science of it, but I believe part of what happens in the sleep process and the waking up process is we need a jolt of cortisol in order to wake up. And so
Mm,
we naturally get that alert feeling that is in this moment is good for us, but it's very different from meditating and coming out of a meditative state and carrying the meditative state with us into our day.
yeah. Yeah, that's interesting. Okay. Yeah, it is all I can say is it's just definitely my experience. It's doing a morning meditation is better than a cup of coffee.
Mhm.
It is more, clears the brain, wakes you up, for me personally, more than a cup of coffee.
Mm.
So there's something going on there in the brain
Mhm.
that's different than
Mhm.
the sleeping brain.
Yes, and, to say a little bit more about that meditative state, if you are meditating in a way that is producing an alpha state of consciousness in the brain, which is a specific brain wave pattern, um, the alpha state is a relaxed, alert state, and it is an ideal state in which to live one's life. Most
Mhm.
people live in beta, which is it's a higher vibration, um, the frequency and amplitude are both higher. It's really great for when we need to problem solve, but it's a
Mhm.
place to visit, ideally. That alpha state sounds like what you're describing, where you get to be relaxed and calm and awake all at the
Yeah.
same time.
Yeah. Yeah, it's a really great place to be, everyone. So I highly recommend it. And I think that it's hard in our busy lives to always stay in that state. But it's always available is what I love. So I will, start out that way in the morning and then life gets lifey and does its thing. And then I recognize that I'm probably in what you're calling the beta state. I feel
Mhm,
just kind of amped up and
mhm,
tense in my body and
mhm,
I'm having trouble like focusing or problem solving or whatever it
Mhm.
is, because I feel that scattered feeling again.
Mhm.
And
Mhm.
then I'll choose to do some form of relaxation. It could be breath work, it could be meditation, it could be some, just yoga at home.
Mhm.
Um, but something that brings me back into that alpha state.
Mhm.
And everything goes so much smoother after that. Like sometimes I fight against it. And I think this is really common because I think, oh my gosh, I don't have time for that. I have so much I have
Mhm.
to do. But it's actually counterproductive. If I just
Mhm.
take the 10 or 15 minutes to do it, everything else flows so much better after that.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Mhm.
And it's
Yeah.
because the brain goes into a different wavelength, which is so cool.
Mhm. Mhm. And we see differently. There's actually a different visual field that we
Yeah.
enjoy depending on what brainwave state we're in or which brainwave is dominant. So it's wonderful what you're touching on because it's such a great reminder that how we care for ourselves matters.
Mhm. It does. And you had said earlier about how people go through their days and then maybe they can't sleep at night because they've been amped
Mhm.
up all day. And for years before I started all these practices, I work as a nurse and I would have like a crazy day at work and think, oh my gosh, I'm going to go home and crash after this. Like, I'm so exhausted. I'm just going to
Mhm.
pass out and get the best
Mhm.
sleep. And those were always the nights that I got actually the worst sleep. I had
Mhm.
a hard time falling asleep. Once I did fall asleep, I'd wake up multiple times through the night or I'd have weird dreams. And it was because, yeah, um, I was trying to down regulate my nervous system just by going to sleep.
Mhm.
And I don't think our bodies are meant to do that.
Mm-mm. No, another way is to have a period of relaxation sometime during the day, like your meditation practice or yoga or breath work or the thing that it could even be artwork or
Mm,
walking in nature.
yeah.
It doesn't have to be spiritual per se. It's just a chance for the body to regulate. And that regulation, even if there's more amping up during the rest of the day, that period of regulation sometime during the day helps a person to sleep at night.
Yeah. Yeah. My daughter, so my daughter has some health issues, and we recently saw like she's like a pain psychologist, I guess you would call her. And this is being so recognized everywhere now, like even in the mainstream medical system, because one of her big recommendations to my daughter was that my daughter has trouble sleeping. And then, school's very early in the morning. And then so she misses a lot of school because she is having pain or she didn't sleep the night before. So she sleeps in later in the morning and then I bring her in. And it's kind of a mess that we're working on. But one of her big recommendations to my daughter was to take breaks throughout the day. So she's saying, I wouldn't want you to get into school, try to get into school on time, but then the last, 5 or 10 minutes of every period or every other period, you're going to the nurse's office, you're laying down, you're being
Mm,
silent and quiet and resting. And then that's refueling you for the next part of your day. And then you just keep
mhm,
repeating this cycle, and it
mhm,
will be more likely that you will be able to sleep at night and then get up early in the morning if you put in these periods of rest throughout the day.
mhm,
Because my daughter was diagnosed with autonomic nervous system dysfunction,
mm,
and so her nervous system is kind of all out of whack, and she gets very drained very easily. Like things
mhm.
just drain her, and then she wants to go straight to bed because she feels
Wow.
so depleted. And so
Mhm,
the idea, and people are going to be listening to this but and not watching it, but the idea is instead of having those highs and lows, those peaks and valleys of her energy, where she like pushes really hard to get through school and then comes home and crashes,
mhm,
that she is constantly working on regulating her nervous system. So she kind of stays in this like zone of regulation instead of going way above the regulation and then way below the regulation. So it's
mhm,
all the same, what we're
mhm,
talking about. So I
mhm,
love it. I love that it's coming to mainstream and that we're recognizing
mhm,
that
mhm.
um, this is so beneficial to people.
Absolutely. Yeah. And what a great example with your daughter. I also imagine a wonderful integration happening at the end of those periods if she chooses to take a rest. Just the integration of the knowledge that she's receiving and
Yeah.
experiencing in class, that of course there is this regulation that is necessary so that she
Mhm.
gets more evened out, but also it provides the space to integrate knowledge.
Yeah. Yeah, it does. And but you know what? She, like so many people, is resisting it.
Yeah.
And she has, accommodations, letters have been written to the teacher, like everyone is aware that she is, allowed to do this. She's being given permission, right? So we
Mhm,
talk a ton
mhm,
about permission giving on this show. And she's been given literal written permission to do this. And I keep asking her, did you rest today throughout the
mm,
day? No.
mhm.
And this is what we all do, right? She's not alone. Like she's,
Mhm,
it's just amazing how we absorb, even at such a young age, this idea that it's not okay to rest. It's not okay to take breaks. Like you have to go, go, go and push, push, push.
mhm, mhm,
And um, I just find it fascinating. And I hope one day she'll be like, no, I'm gonna do what's better for my body and I'm gonna choose to do this. But I just think she's just an example of how in
mhm,
general
mhm,
we we don't take care of ourselves. We don't do
mhm,
what could be so helpful to us because there's some idea that it's lazy or I don't know what. And that I just have to perform, I have to achieve, I have to function when you
mhm,
actually can get better functioning by taking that
mhm.
rest.
Yes, and I don't know about her. I can imagine for another person it could also be about fitting in or not wanting to be different or not wanting to make a big
Yeah.
deal about something.
Right,
And
right. Yeah.
my own kiddo has some health challenges and he was pretending at school. He's 10 and he was pretending, um, which was very sad for me because there's a way that he didn't also wouldn't let people in because he was pretending. For him, part of his stuff is vision, so he was pretending to see things that he couldn't see.
Mm.
And boy, I just want all of us to be able to be ourselves.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, that fitting in piece, especially when people, kids are young, it's really hard. They do really want to fit in. And
Mhm,
even my daughter, she doesn't share a lot of her stuff with her friends. And she
mhm,
feels that they would be supportive and they would be, kind, and she doesn't worry that they would, not want to be friends with her or make fun of her or anything like that. But she just, I think, wants to feel normal. She just wants to feel
mhm,
normal. And so
mhm,
that, avoidance, not talking about it, sharing it, maybe not taking the breaks is a way of trying to feel normal when she's
mhm,
dealing with something that, an average child is not dealing with.
mhm, mhm,
But these are all, I think you're right. There's an integration that will happen, a learning that will happen that will hopefully benefit both of them when they get older.
mhm.
So let's talk about your meditation offerings. What do you do? How often do you offer them? What do they look like? Like give me all the details.
All the details
Mhm.
are that people can find my guided meditations on my podcast that is called Every Moment is Sacred. I have a couple of guided meditations on Insight Timer that are free. It's a free app, and um, those are available. And I have a very small baby YouTube channel. And on that channel, there are some guided meditations from this year's year long meditation private group. And the way that works is that every month I do a free offering. So, you, Katie, your audience, everyone is welcome to the free offering. It's online, and we just have a meditation. And then throughout the year, the private group also meets for the people who have invested in the group. And I
Okay.
record the meditation part. So, not to break any confidentiality, but just to keep offering the guidance and the wisdom and the love of meditation. And so people can go to Rain Elizabeth Stickney on YouTube and find those meditations there. And then I teach in person at my local library, which is just a joy to gather people in person and and the locals around. I live in a very small town, only 4,000 people, so very very different from the San Francisco Bay Area. And
Yeah.
it's nice to get to know the people who are drawn to meditation here in Vermont.
Okay. All right, that's awesome. And I will put all of that, in our show notes so that people can access you and find that free meditation. And is the group a rolling group, or it's a year long and then you start a new group at the end of the year?
Yeah, that's a great question. So I have people who have committed to the year. And now what we do is we include people every month. So you can be part of the group for an entire month and decide if you want to continue on or not. But that just makes it um, still contained. Emotional
Mhm.
safety is very important for me. And we're not doing a lot of drop ins in and out, in and out.
Okay.
But for the month, there might be somebody who invests in that,
Mhm.
and that's enough where they continue on.
Okay. Okay. And how many times do you meet a month?
It depends. Every month is a little
Okay.
different depending on my schedule, but it's all listed out so I can
Okay.
um, provide that for people who are interested,
Okay.
and people are welcome to email me for any details.
Okay, great. I mean, I think that, meditation is something that obviously we can do on our own. You can sit there, you can close your eyes, you can try to focus on something, but and it's great. That's great. But there's something really beautiful about the energy of someone who's leading a meditation, just holding that space
Hmm.
for the meditators. It
Hmm.
feels there is a psychological safety that comes with it. It's magical. It's in my opinion, there's some form of like magic that happens when you gather people together to do this sacred, beautiful practice together, and then you have this one person who's creating the container and holding the space and being, I guess.
Hmm. Hmm.
Just
Yeah.
being. Yeah. And you can really feel that energy of that person and all the people, that you're doing it with. So that's beautiful. I love that. And I will put all of that information in the show notes. So let's talk about. I am so curious about what
Hmm.
we talked about right before we got on when you said it was couples and
Mm.
parenting and couples modalities. And you
Hmm.
mentioned two different things that I have never heard of before. So
Hmm.
tell me what those are again, and then let's talk a little bit about them.
Sure. So for couples, well, let me just first say that everything I do in presence first. So that's the most important thing to me, no matter what modality I'm offering.
Mhm.
And that being said, there are modalities that I find very helpful. And the Gottman Method is a very helpful couples counseling technique that is completely based in communication. How are we communicating with each other? And some of the highlights that I find phenomenal about this approach are that John Gottman was a single man and he wanted to know more about relationships. And he developed a research study where he studied what do couples do when they're alone. He had an apartment, people would stay there, and everything was recorded. And then everything was um, tallied up and analyzed. And he had some really interesting findings, as well as some interesting ways of finding those findings. And so, just a couple little parts of that are that he found that in day to day life, it's best if we are using a 20-to-1 ratio of positive to negative statements.
Mm.
So, like you and I just talking, we could analyze our conversation. Are we saying 20 positive things for every negative thing we're saying? We can just be curious about it. But if there's conflict, the ratio goes down to 5-to-1. So all couples fight. It's natural. And some of us fight well, and some of us fight terribly. But if we start to pay attention to, even in a fight, are we willing to say something like, I like your smile.
Mhm.
Thank you for this cup of water. I'm glad we're talking. This is really hard, but I'm still here. And those small gestures are found to create what he considers. And then, so then let me just jump forward a little bit. Then John married Julie Gottman. And so the Gottman approach is really because of John and Julie's relationship, where
Mhm.
John did the research, Julie was a clinician, and she said, we need to offer this to people. And together they developed a way that they could offer this method. So it belongs to both of them. Now, they found that a happy couple is happy because they are having a good time together and they're long term in a way that makes sense for them. And also, somebody else who would gaze upon them would find them to be happy, which is a really interesting part of the research because
Mhm.
they took recordings of couples and they would ask the couple, are you happy? Look at this recording. Do you look happy? And now, stranger, look at this couple and what do you see?
Mhm.
And so, to find these couples who are feeling happy, judging themselves as happy, and somebody else would experience them as happy, have some trademarks, which are that they are generally really good friends and they have this 5-to-1 ratio when they fight. And they're willing to do really small things often. And that's like an overview of the Gottman method.
Mhm. And so what you're saying is they can help couples. This method helps couples to do those things that you're saying.
Mhm. Mhm.
That's wow, that's really good. During a fight, 5 to 1. That is not easy.
It does stretch the brain.
Really does. Okay. Okay. So, and then what was the other one you mentioned?
And then hand in hand parenting was
Okay.
developed by Patty Whipfler. And similar to me, she grew up in a very large family. And she developed this approach. She has 2 children of her own, and she's now a grandmother. But she developed an approach of parenting that's based on listening. And that includes the parent having listening time with someone who trusts them, thinks highly of them, and is not going to solve any of their problems. And similarly, the parent has to feel trusting of that listener and trusted by that listener
Mhm.
and free to speak about anything, especially the hard stuff. And especially this is one method that says yes, vent it all out. And that goes contrary to some other methods. And I respect a lot of different parenting approaches, but this is one way to get out some of that yucky stuff in a really
Mhm.
safe setting. And then that kind of safety is carried to the child. So then when the child is tantruming, the parent can also be 100% present. No, it has nothing to do with them. The child
Mhm.
is having feelings. And then there are ways of working with those feelings that this approach teaches based on respect and safety.
Okay. And do you use both of these methods in your own life? And do you use them outside of your own personal, relationships?
Yep, I use both of these methods in my life. Um, I have a partner and a son, and then just in the world, like these are approaches that I use as a person too. And then I teach them professionally. So if I'm working with someone one on one, or a parent, or a family, or a couple, or even in a group, this comes in. Sometimes in groups, this isn't happening today in my current groups, but I have been in business since 2007. So I have a lot of experience of different moments in time. And sometimes groups can get a little complainy, a little whiny.
Mhm.
It's
Mhm.
natural, it's not a
Mhm.
problem. But these kinds of approaches that are based in listening and respect and finding some gratitude,
Mhm.
it can help that group to reshape itself in a
Mm.
more compassionate and loving way.
Yeah.
So everything that I do professionally, I do personally and vice versa.
Yeah. So you live it. You walk the walk, you walk the talk. Well, I don't know. I can't remember that expression, but
Exactly.
yes.
And I'm learning every day. So not to say that I have, that I'm done. I'm
Right.
walking the path along with everybody.
Yeah. Yeah. That's awesome. That I love that. Well, is there anything else? We're coming close to the end of our time here. Is there anything else that we didn't touch on that you would like to talk about?
Well, the only thing that comes to mind is although I am on social media, Instagram is my favorite one. So that's the place that I'm the most active. And I know you'll link to everything, but that's a fun place to find me if anybody is interested.
Okay. All right. Sounds good. And like I said, I'll put all your information in the show notes, as well as that podcast that we talked about, and some other resources. There was a few things that I'll have to go back and listen that were pinging when you were saying them, that I thought, oh, I should put that in the show notes too. So everybody look out for a bunch of resources in the show notes. And thank you so much for being here. I really appreciate your time. I know you're homeschooling now, right? So I really appreciate
Hmm.
that you were able to fit this in with a busy homeschooling schedule.
Yeah, it's my pleasure. Thank you for having me.
Right. Bye-bye. Okay, we covered a lot there. But there's one thing that stood out to me that I would like to offer as the mindfulness exercise for the week, and that is the nervous system regulation piece. The fact that we can access that deep relaxation and it's very healing for our bodies, and makes us feel good, which I always say is probably the most important part to me. I don't care how it works, it makes me feel good. But that we need to do it throughout our day. It can't just be, a meditation in the morning, or one yoga class throughout the day, or nothing at all, and we just think that sleeping is enough to regulate our nervous system. That when we sprinkle it throughout our day, it really has these beautiful benefits in our life to making us feel better, like I said, but more clarity, more focus, more productivity, um, more compassion and kindness towards self and others, because we just feel better. And when you feel better, it's easier. It's easier to have patience and to be understanding of others' perspectives, and so on and so forth. So, that is what I'd like to offer you, and that can be done in any way. Like Rain was saying, I love meditation and I love breath work, and I love a yoga nidra session. But if for you it's being creative, or it's digging in the dirt and planting something, or it's taking a walk, um, then try to incorporate some of those things into your day. But I know we're all busy. That's really a lot of the resistance that comes to doing these practices, is finding the time. And so, even doing something as simple as choosing to take 10 or 15 minutes to make a cup of tea or a cup of coffee, and sitting in silence and drinking it without scrolling on your phone or watching TV. Maybe put a little, music, relaxing music on in the background. But that's enough. That's a huge, huge win. Even, when you are eating breakfast or lunch or one of your meals that maybe you might not be with company while you're eating your meal, taking the time to just mindfully eat the meal. Again, not distracted by anything else, no phones, no TV, just you and the food, and looking at each bite, and really, really feeling what it feels like in your mouth, and tasting it, and all of the sensations that go with eating, just being really present. These are ways that are you can incorporate into your daily routine. They don't take a lot of time. You have to eat lunch or breakfast anyway. Um, and they are helpful in regulating your nervous system and making you feel more present, more open, like Rain was saying, where we have that more kind of 360 space around us. Um, and they will benefit you in the rest of your life. So get creative, get playful. You don't have to do any of the recommendations that I offer up. You can find ways that speak to you and are meaningful to you, but allow you to feel that feeling of deep relaxation, of space, of clarity, um, of joy and gratitude. So, whatever it is for you that gives you those feelings, walk towards that. Always walk towards the things that do that for you. All right. I hope you have a wonderful week. I will be seeing you next week. If you have any particular things you would like to see on a mini-sode as well, I know I mentioned in the intro about particular show topics, but also reach out if there's anything that you would like to see in a mini-sode, a particular exercise or a topic, a meditation, a focus for a meditation. Let me know because I am here to serve and I want to know what you guys want. All right. Have a great week, everyone. Bye bye.